Una lezione, una conferenza può essere un'opera d'arte? Io sono convinto di sì. Un quadro si guarda, un cibo si gusta, un libro si legge, una lezione innanzitutto si ascolta, come in certi casi si può ascoltare una sinfonia. Stiamo per assistere a questa magia, un tema estremamente attuale, declinato attraverso il pensiero di quello che è forse il più grande filosofo di tutti i tempi, Platone e il suo celeberrimo mito della caverna, raccontato da una delle voci più autorevoli e originali dei nostri tempi. Melissa Lane, classe 1943, anche se di una donna non si dovrebbe mai dire l'età, professore ordinario di politica presso la Princeton University. Il titolo: Una repubblica ecologica, Platone e la sostenibilità. Ma cos'è la sostenibilità? È la caratteristica di un processo o di uno stato che può essere mantenuto a un certo livello indefinitamente. Il principio guida della sostenibilità è lo sviluppo sostenibile, che riguarda in modo interconnesso l'ambito ambientale, quello economico e quello sociale. Per sviluppo sostenibile si intende lo sviluppo volto a soddisfare i bisogni della generazione presente senza compromettere la capacità delle generazioni future di far fronte ai propri bisogni. Il termine sviluppo sostenibile è stato introdotto per la prima volta dal rapporto Brundtland della Commissione Mondiale per l'Ambiente e lo Sviluppo nel 1987, pensate. Ma la sostenibilità può anche essere definita come un processo socio-ecologico caratterizzato dal desiderio di perseguire un ideale comune. Per quanto possa essere difficile raggiungere questo ideale, un atteggiamento perseverante, un atteggiamento dinamico, fa in modo che il processo dia luogo a un sistema sostenibile. Il percorso verso il raggiungimento della sostenibilità rappresenta anche una sfida sociale, che coinvolge il diritto internazionale, il diritto nazionale, il sistema urbanistico dei trasporti, gli stili di vita locali e individuali, il consumo critico. Per vivere in modo sostenibile o più sostenibile si può ricorrere ad alcune strategie come la riorganizzazione delle condizioni di vita, la revisione dei settori economici o delle prassi lavorative, l'utilizzo delle scienze per lo sviluppo di nuove tecnologie, oppure la progettazione di sistemi flessibili e reversibili, ma innanzitutto l'adattamento degli stili di vita individuali, volto alla conservazione delle risorse naturali. Alla luce di fenomeni come il degrado ambientale, il cambiamento climatico, il sovracconsumo, l'aumento demografico, la crescita economica illimitata in un sistema chiuso, la concreta possibilità che la società umana possa in futuro raggiungere gli obiettivi della sostenibilità ambientale è stata, e devo dire continua a rimanere piuttosto incerta, nonostante il termine sostenibilità goda di una popolarità sempre maggiore. E in questo senso gli obiettivi di sviluppo sostenibile, i cosiddetti Sustainable Development Goals, definiscono il quadro attuale dei 17 obiettivi stabiliti per lo sviluppo internazionale futuro. L'Agenda 2030 per lo sviluppo sostenibile, adottata il 25 settembre del 2015, comprende obiettivi quali porre fine alla povertà, azzerare la fame, promuovere il benessere, quindi un obiettivo diretto alla salute, garantire un'educazione di qualità, assicurare l'uguaglianza di genere, garantire a tutti l'accesso a un'energia economica affidabile e moderna, favorire la crescita economica duratura e così via. E noi oggi ascolteremo come il processo per il raggiungimento di questi obiettivi debba avere al centro l'etica prima ancora che la scienza, che il processo di cambiamento non può essere guidato soltanto da poche persone dall'alto, in quanto l'importanza dell'azione individuale non può essere dimenticata, che l'unico scopo per cui il potere può essere legittimamente esercitato su qualsiasi membro di una comunità civile contro la sua volontà è per prevenire danni agli altri. E quanto è attuale di questi tempi un'affermazione di questo tipo, quanto ci stiamo interrogando sulle limitazioni che i provvedimenti dettati per l'emergenza oppongono alla nostra libertà individuale nell'ottica di essere considerati all'interno della nostra Costituzione, che è una Costituzione che prevede e mette al primo posto proprio la libertà individuale. Ebbene, nell'ambito del nostro Festival del Classico 2020, di questo straordinario appuntamento che ogni anno mette insieme voci autorevoli provenienti da ogni parte del mondo, e quest'anno più che mai, perché la pandemia, l'impossibilità di muoverci, ci ha permesso di coinvolgere attraverso dei video, anziché di presenza, persone veramente ai quattro angoli del globo. Ebbene, questo straordinario festival oggi ci pone domande e ci pone risposte attraverso la voce di Melissa Lane. Vi auguro quindi una buona visione, un buon ascolto, con l'auspicio che le argomentazioni convincenti che ascolterete combattano efficacemente la nostra atavica paura di cambiare, alimentando un desiderio insopprimibile di farlo. Buona giornata e grazie.
Imagine a released prisoner returning to a society that they now see as fundamentally deluded and trying to point out the error of the existing ways. They proclaim that what is publicly called success is actually failure, that career paths to power and prestige do public damage, not public service, that what seem to be solid facts are actually dangerous illusions. The technologies and infrastructure and assumptions in which the society is invested are fraudulent, that the glare of reality would expose these as wishful delusions. Such a newcomer is likely to be shunned at best, stoned at worst. How could any society be expected to tolerate such arrogant insults to their whole way of life? Pull back the camera on this scene, however, and it appears in a new light. The busy self-righteousness of this political order is in fact built on foundations of sand. The prizes the societies strive for are made of smoke and mirrors. Success in their competitions is self-undermining. In fact, powerful figures invested in the maintenance of this existing delusional social order parade the objects and languages in which the people believe, denying that any external challenge to them could be valid. Denial of the external perspective looks from this higher vantage point like keeping one's head in the sand, refusing to face what is obvious and valid. A passive citizen body, a conniving and self-interested set of sophistic opinion formers and demagogic political leaders, a systematically misleading and damaging order of political structures and common beliefs and appetites. This is how Plato in the Republic portrays the effects of his contemporaries' system of education, by which he means their values and practices. He describes the cities of his day as being closed caves. Trapped inside, people box at shadows, elbowing each other to achieve advantage and preeminence, while being all the time unknowing captives of a delusional state. The artificial firelight inside is but a feeble and perverse imitation of the light of the sun, the truth which stands outside and above every given cave. I have taught Plato's image of the cave, for that is what I've been describing from Book 7 of Plato's Republic, to hundreds of people, old and young, students and senior citizens, corporate executives and public officials. And doing so led me to ask, in clinging to the comforts and familiarities of our current way of life and its fossil fuel infrastructure? Are we trapping ourselves in the modern version of Plato's cave? What would it mean for our conceptions of our cities and ourselves if we were to dare to leave that cave, to face the challenge of making our conveniences and competitions conform instead to the demands of external reality, and in particular, the demands of ecological sustainability, including the need to rein in climate change? This talk, which is based on my book of the same name, is an attempt to answer that question, and to do so by taking seriously the challenge which Plato poses while developing a more positive answer than he offered to the question of whether a democratic society could conceivably generate such change from within. My claim is not that Plato himself was thinking about ecological sustainability, but rather that his Republic investigates how to make a society socially stable. That is, stable over time, not because of repression, but because people's motivations and values stably interact to reproduce valuable forms of social relationship. As his character Socrates says in the Republic, a city with sound education, and I quote, will go on growing in a cycle, or as we might say, in a virtuous circle, as opposed to a vicious one. So in these terms, Platonic social stability must lie at the heart of ecological sustainability, which we can understand broadly as the production and reproduction of a society relating to the environment in ways which are both valuable in themselves and sustainable over time. So sustainability must be understood as a dynamic idea revolving around what Plato would call a conception of the good. Sustainability must have ethics as much as science at its heart. If this is what sustainability demands, what can Plato offer to the struggle to achieve it? I believe that he can help us understand the urgent need to reshape our ethical and political imagination so as to overcome the inertia built into the status quo bias, as it's been called, that fortifies the walls of our cave, and to foster the initiative needed to reshape society on sustainable terms. So to recap, Plato can help us to move from inertia through imagination to initiative. And this is essential because even today, even when actions to address climate change would save us money, and when the status quo is demonstrably dangerous, we still too often fail to change. We need to rethink how we see the actions that we take in order to take the leap of initiative needed to confront these challenges. Now, to be sure, Plato does have some problems in what he offers. His insistence that a process of social change has to be directed by a very few people to the top, from the top down, and that individuals have to keep to their assigned social roles, while only a few people at the top consider the good of the whole society, need to be rethought. I think we can take Plato's challenge, but ask how individuals at any level of society can contribute to imaginatively reshaping its ethos, and can take responsibility for doing so and incorporate that into whatever their social role might be. In this way, we can both learn from Plato and also move beyond him. So let me turn to the heart of my talk on the virtues and the idea of the good, which are the major framework that Plato's Republic offers to help us understand social stability and hence a key part of ecological sustainability. And we can best illuminate the virtues by way of their opposite vices. The 2008 financial crisis, for example, generated significant commentary on classical Greek vices as lying at its root. And I will suggest that this is parallel to the current crisis of sustainability. Hubris and greed and heedlessness. This is the way one New York Times columnist summed up the causes of the financial crisis, which broke in 2008. And she added one further diagnosis of some of the players in the financial game who provoked the meltdown, saying that some of them were, and I quote, downright stupid. These condemnations epitomize some of the worst vices known to the ancient Greeks. Hubris, or insolent arrogance towards one's fellows, greed, or rapacious and unlimited desires, heedlessness, the refusal to brook restraint, which the ancients would call intemperance, and stupidity, which in this case means the inability to understand real consequences and to appreciate true value. And seeing the relevance of these Greek failings can help us to appreciate what the Greeks understood by their opposites, the virtues. Justice, or fair play and mutual respect in place of hubris. Self-discipline, or intelligently directed and limited desire in place of greed. A proper courage which respects what is truly to be feared in place of heedlessness and recklessness. And reason, understood as wisdom, not mere calculating cunning, in place of stupidity. These, justice, self-discipline, courage, and wisdom, constitute the four cardinal virtues of Plato's Republic. And the dynamics of the financial crisis, the lessons we failed to learn from each successive wave, are the same as the lessons that we need to take from our failure so far to get to grips with the ecological crisis. This is that the excessive greed of a few has been merely the exaggeration of a system made broadly in their image, a system which was set up to allow people to push the limits without any requirement to consider the bigger picture. So the habits of the many, of all of us, have not been negligible in this system. Our own habits have both shaped it and been reinforced by it. And conversely, institutions are not immune to the qualities and aspirations and habits, in short, the virtues of the individuals who operate in and by them. When the British Chancellor of the Exchequer argued in 2009 that bank directors must exercise good individual judgment as what he called the first line of defense against financial failure, his argument made headlines precisely because we tend to forget how important individual action, even within systems that need to be further changed, must be. Plato gives us language to articulate what too often escapes us: the inescapable importance of individual virtue and individual initiative in achieving a truly stable and sustainable social order. It's not that individual action is enough, far from it, but it does lie at the heart of the social changes that we also need. So if these virtues and vices are relevant to financial dangers, they're equally relevant to environmental ones. In fact, the two crises are not merely parallel, but intertwined. They both involve a mountain of heedlessly incurred debt, a kind of overdraft on the carrying capacity and resilience of our financial system or our planet. And they're rooted in the same outlook of mispricing environmental goods or financial risks, the same blinkers, the same division of labor to the point that individual responsibility for the system as a whole disappears. In short, we've let ourselves run up an ecological debt, which we have not yet been willing to pay. These desires and dynamics which threaten civic order were summed up by the ancient Greeks with a single primary concept, what they called pleonexia, literally grasping for more, meaning an immoderate, overreaching desire for more than one's share. This vice embodied the tensions between the individual and the city. But pleonexia came to appear less bad in the wake of the Reformation and the religious wars in early modern Europe, which made fanaticism seem more of a threat to civilized society than greed. So from a Greek point of view, we can almost say that the 18th century, with the rise of commercial society, revived pleonexia, but as a virtue, not a vice, or at least as the lesser of two evils, encouraging people to pursue material accumulation to distract them from pursuing their passion for heaven or glory. But now the price of that solution is becoming clear. By licensing unlimited pleonexia, by treating it in effect as a virtue, we're starting to hit the wall. What was the solution has now become part of the problem. So we have to change to reimagine what we take to be normal and possible, reasonable and admirable. By seeing ourselves as citizens not of an unlimited commercial society, but of eco-republics who share a common good and take responsibility for co-producing it in common, we can kickstart the transition to a sustainable society. How do the virtues contribute to this end? Plato has Socrates describe it in terms of how a just person will live and behave. With a healthy balance of the soul, with reason governing their appetites, those appetites won't get out of control or fix on pleasures that destroy social relationships. Socrates catalogs the ways in which the just person refrains from experiencing the out of control lust or greed that would tempt them to embezzle, steal, betray. This is because their reason governs their appetites. And so we see that self-discipline here serves as the underlying scaffolding of all the other virtues. To adapt some phrasing from the philosopher Immanuel Kant, self-control without knowledge may be blind, but knowledge without self-control is impotent. So just as we have to build sustainability into our pursuit of any other good, so self-discipline is a condition on the pursuit of any good that we may seek over time. Socrates in the Republic sums up that the virtual person will, as he says, live on good terms with themselves and will, he says, be ready for action of any kind, whether political or private. As this shows, virtue for Plato is not an optional, perfectionist pursuit. It's rather a precondition for our own happiness and for meaningful agency. Virtue is the basic parameter of psychic and social health, without which both the soul and the city risk crumbling into disorder, at worst, dissolving into civil war. So our justice and virtue make both for our own good and for treating others justly. Both arise for the same root. So far, I've argued for the salience of the Greek virtues to solving both the financial and ecological crises brought on, in large part, by characteristically Greek vices. But Plato does not rest content there. To the astonishment of the youthful character Glaucon, who was in real life Plato's brother, Socrates tells him that the highest form of knowledge will be not knowledge of the virtues alone, but knowledge of the good. And this is because, as he says, the good is the end of all endeavor, the object on which every heart is set. Goodness, in Socrates and Plato's view, is a sort of natural, genuine property, what people are always pursuing, even when they are ignorant or wrong about what constitutes it. To supply an analogy, if I'm going to take medicine, I want it to be good medicine, not bad. If I learn that I've been taking fake or faulty medicine, I will feel cheated and alarmed. Good medicine produces the real benefit, which bad medicine cannot. Socrates points out that, as he says, when it's a matter of justice or beauty, many people prefer the appearance to the reality. But no one is satisfied to have something that only appears good. They want something that really is good. They have no use here for appearances. Socrates' point is that people may be satisfied merely to appear just to others, or to present a beautiful facade without minding so much whether that facade corresponds to reality. As long as it looks good, that's enough. But when it comes to what is good, people do have an instinctive desire, a real craving for what is genuinely good, and they want to avoid being fobbed off by a mere facade. Again, it doesn't take a philosopher to persuade me that I want good medicine, good food, or good friends, much less a good vaccine against the coronavirus. I'm instinctively on the lookout for what is good in these domains and averse to what is bad. Now, of course, in Plato's Republic, this inquiry into the nature of what is truly good takes Socrates into the arcane realms of metaphysics, the form of the good or the idea of the good. And that's a deep question, what Plato means by the forms or the ideas. But without having to follow all of his metaphysical reflections, I think we can still take away the key insights that what appears to be good is not always real, and that we have to interrogate appearances of goodness in doing our utmost to attain what is truly good. So it's that key difference between appearance and reality, the kind of difference that separates truth from fake news as well, which is what matters here. So we can remain alert to the Platonic question of the difference between appearance and reality, while again rejecting his own way of filling it out which gave warrant to a hierarchical model of politics, a few elite philosopher rulers who should hold sway over the rest. Our version of Platonism can lead us to focus on the universal pursuit of goodness and its inescapable immanence in the everyday. Goodness can remain an orienting idea for us, even without the metaphysical, eternal character with which Plato's Republic endows it. So how can such an idea of goodness transform our social imagination in relation to the challenges of sustainability? Let me briefly suggest 3 ways: by rethinking the nature of harm, by rethinking how we see costs and benefits, and by rethinking the idea of growth. So first, harm. As John Stuart Mill articulated the benchmark of liberal political philosophy, as he wrote, I quote, "The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others." Now, for a long time, we've thought of such harm as having to be relatively direct, immediate, and in the moment already amounting to a grave risk or outcome. But when we get to grips with climate change, we start to see that harm which is indirect and slow, which accumulates on an ongoing basis rather than being expressed in a single discrete act, needs also to be fed into the harm principle and will lead to very different results. So we can maintain the principle of a liberal society while rethinking the harms against which it allows us, indeed requires us, to guard. In the same way, how we think with Plato about virtue and the good can reshape our cost and benefit calculations more broadly, even when the imposition of legal sanction is not in question. Take the example of solar panels. Many people think that the only reason to install solar panels is if it's clear that they can calculate them to save money over time. But think about other aims which we pursue as good. Good friends, good furnishings, good food. Those don't save us money, but we're still willing to pursue them as good. Now, that isn't to say that we shouldn't try to make solar panels and other environmentally beneficial goods less costly, but it is to say that we might think about the goods that we're willing to pursue for their own sake, without holding them hostage to getting pricing just right. Indeed, even with carbon taxes, if people are willing to game the system, we won't succeed. So we need to be willing to pursue these goods in their own right because of what they can truly benefit, the ways in which they can truly benefit us, even without having to fall back always on financial bottom lines alone. And finally, in light of a Platonic notion of the good, consider the idea of growth. As many economists and politicians have begun to point out, gross domestic product per capita is a poor surrogate for health or sustainability. It's liable to count an increase in environmental bads, the product of polluting industries, for example, as if it were good. But for Plato in the Republic, the condition of growth is meaningfulness modeled in the light of the sun. In other words, we might say that for Plato, growth must make sense. It must be meaningful. Otherwise, it's only an anarchic, cancerous sprawl. So rather than posit growth and health as rival scenarios for development, as many studies have done, The Platonic message is that healthy growth is the only growth to which it is sane to aspire. So with the ecological economist Herman Daly, for example, we might consider stop treating production as a good, as a given, instead treat it as a cost to be minimized. We might even, Daly suggests, stop treating advertising as a good, but rather as a social bad, tax it as a pollutant rather than allowing it to be written off as a business expense. Let me draw to a close. At one moment in the Republic, Socrates reflects on a transformation in Greek social norms as follows. He says, and I quote, "What reason had proved best lost its absurdity to the eye." What this says is that if we rethink what counts as good, what benefits us and others, that can change the way we imagine and see the world. It can even change what we see as ridiculous or laughable. So if the arguments are compelling, we should not be afraid to change. We can be part of the vanguard of a new sense of the ridiculous, a new sense of the good, a new sense of the necessary. One early 20th century scholar of Plato identified a fallacy to which we are all susceptible, which he called the principle of unripe time, and I quote Cornford, that people should not do at the present moment what they think right at that moment, because the moment at which they think it right has not yet arrived. We don't want to risk missing the Platonic call for individual virtue and initiative, for drawing on our imaginations to overcome our status quo inertia. If we do so, we risk missing what the Greeks called the kairos, the crucial opportune moment for action in light of the good.